Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You're listening to a new episode of the Leadership Student Podcast with MK Palmore. We are all lifelong learners, and nowhere is this more relevant than in the practice of leadership. Our goal is continual learning and improvement. Let's get after it. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Our guest today is James Cook, veteran United States Marine Corps and also an executive in the solar industry today. James and I have been friends and cohorts for more than 30 years. He's had some significant leadership experience over the time, and I thought it might be interesting to bring him in and talk a little bit about his story and some of his experiences. So, James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, MK. It's great to be here.
So, James, for the benefit of our audience, I don't want to spoil it. Give them a little bit about your background, where you grew up, education background, and we'll get into some discussions about the U.S. Marine Corps.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to live in a number of places. My parents weren't. I wasn't a military brat, but my dad had several different jobs in the banking industry that moved us from Detroit, where I was born, to Northern California, to Connecticut, when he worked in Manhattan, to London, England, to Kansas, where my mom's parents lived, and I lived with them for some time, and then came back to California, Northern California, where I went to high school. And as you mentioned, my real education was in the United States Marine Corps, but I also have an undergraduate degree from Harvard and an MBA from UC Berkeley.
Excellent. So all that moving around, I think I'm certain, helped to develop quite a bit of your character and your background. Talk a little bit about maybe the first time the subject of leadership was introduced to you. Maybe it was when growing up, maybe it was in athletic sports or competition, which I believe you participated in sports in both high school and college. So talk a little bit about leadership, when it was first introduced and what it meant to you at that time.
Yeah, honestly, I was sort of intimidated by leadership, the idea of being a leader. I love competitive sports, but I often preferred to kind of do my thing, focus on what I was doing. And I was glad when I was finally really introduced into leadership positions in sports, because it did, make me realize that I could contribute a lot more than just my own performance by helping to bring other people together and sometimes, find a translation point between coaches and my teammates. So I was a captain of my basketball team in college. I was captain of my high school tennis team, and in neither case was I the best player, but my teammates and coaches saw in me, led me to get in those positions. And I now loved, anytime I'm doing something, sports or something, I always want to be organizing. I always want to be providing some sort of leadership. It always makes me much more interesting to me. So I play in an adult soccer league still, and I'm always the guy kind of coordinating the team and getting people in one place. And I feel like my experience in life, mostly after having served in the United States Marine Corps, has been about, how do I help people around me who have a great deal of talent and enthusiasm work together. And this has been true in my professional life too, is like, what can I bring to making sure everyone's organized and headed down the same path, the same mission and the same budget and timeline in mind. And again, that all, while I had these early experiences through sports mostly, it was really the experience of serving as an officer in the Marine Corps that I learned the essentials of leadership and grew to love it, and I went from seeing leadership as sort of a burden when I was younger, I think, to now something this one of the things I most enjoy about life is helping other people realize their potential through me helping to organize and provide some sort of spark in leadership.
So before we even get to the United States Marine Corps, I want to unpack one of the ideas that I have around leadership in sports, especially at the high school and college age. I view as more of an influence position rather than direct leadership. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between sort of offering influence to maybe your colleagues, friends, and teammates as opposed to being the guy who specifically is in charge of them?
Yeah, it's a great distinction, MK, to make because as a fellow player on some team, I'm not going to. In the sports I was playing, I wasn't calling out plays. It was always the coach who was doing that. And in tennis, in particular, it's a largely individual sport. But I could provide some sort of extra influence, and sometimes might range from being a cheerleader to encouraging guys to get to practice on time, or realize that we were a team, even though the sport is such an individual sport. And I think at times you're right. That you can have some sort of additional influence that's different than a coach, but something that's amongst your peers, people will appreciate it. And so I think you're right. I think that's an important distinction because that's very different than in, say, my professional career where I've held positions of leadership and I'm, literally directing people what to do, determining their, whether or not they're going to get promoted or fired and what their salary is and that sort of thing. Those things where you're leading a group and you're really able to tell people here what to do or what not to do. You're right. In sports, those early leadership experiences were how do I on the edges influence my teammates to maybe make better choices, recognize the importance of working as a team. And then, and I think it was also the first time I had the experience of really seeing how valuable leadership from the front is, leadership by example. I got to the point where as I realized it wasn't effective to tell someone to come to practice on time if I wasn't there on time. It wasn't effective to encourage someone to make a greater effort on the basketball team if I wasn't making a great effort myself. And so sometimes providing that example in sports was really the thing that I started to recognize early on was an important leadership trait that I definitely was honed in service in the Marines. But you're right. I like that distinction.
So I think that what you did just now is you very accurately depicted what should be an example of the formative stages of leadership where maybe through experience you understand that how you act, how you show up as an individual can influence others. And so maybe that's part of the early stage building, and it's great that you were able to tease that out. I had often thought for folks that participate in high school sports and college sports that it is absolutely a training ground for what might be in their future. So let's jump a little bit to your time in the United States Marine Corps. For our fellow veterans who will be listening in on this, your experiences, I'm sure will resonate with them. But really, the audience here is probably in large part private sector folks who don't have very similar experiences, having never served in the U.S. military, and it can be pretty impactful in terms of its for those that go through that experience. How do you view your experience in the Marine Corps from the vantage point of leadership? I assume that you feel it made a stamp on you. Can you talk a little bit about like how you think about leadership differently from based upon your time in the Marines?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be the leader I am today and feel so passionate about leadership if it weren't for serving for 4 years in the United States Marine Corps as an officer, going through the Marine Corps officer candidate school, going through basic school, and getting that kind of leadership training. It was unlike anything else I've ever done. You really get a chance to try out different ways of being a leader. You actually get taught very specific leadership traits. And the Marine Corps teaches a great deal about leadership, a real focus on how to become a good leader, what the leadership traits are of good leaders, and testing out opportunities to give you leadership roles through early on in the training and then throughout your experience of becoming a leader in the Marine Corps. So everything I learned about leadership really was either came from the Marine Corps or was tested and tried and came about as something that is now part of me because of the Marine Corps and in the Marine Corps. I can't say enough about how I've spent a lot of time in my early life in school, had lots of different education, very high level educational experiences, learned a ton in the different places I was, but I never had anyone sit me down and say, these are the traits that a leader should have. Here's what a leader should do. Here's what a leader looks like. And specifically had that training on leadership. And the Marine Corps does a fantastic job of it. And not surprisingly, it's part of the ethos of the Marine Corps. What makes the Marine Corps special is that sense that every Marine can and will be a leader at some point. And the structure is set up such a way that you have some Marines who are in charge of 4 other Marines in a fire team, or you have Marines who are in charge of you have the commandant who's in charge of the United States, the entire United States Marine Corps. So each Marine needs to learn how to be a leader, and I certainly got that. And like I said before, it was one place where someone actually sat us down and told us these are the things that can make you a great leader, but allowed us to hone our own spirit of leadership, what actually works for us each as individuals. And one thing I'd say, MK, that might be surprising for folks that haven't served in the military, from my experience of being in the Marines, was it's not a lot easier just because you can order someone around. In fact, I would say you're sort of failing as a leader if you have to order someone to do something. If you have to resort to saying you have to do this because I'm the one who signed your paycheck, if you will, then it's probably not working your leadership style. So you learn a lot more about in leadership about either providing that example of what a leader is, providing an example of how to behave, showing other people, that example of what you're looking for, living that and really embodying what you're looking for and seeing in the traits of the people that you're leading. And in the end, almost encouraging them in a way, at least my leadership style is to encourage people to follow my lead and have them do the things that I'm looking for to be done without me having to say, you really need to do this. And you can tell by my passion here, I could talk on and on about this, but I think one of the things I really learned was you want to be able to take, you're not just, it's not just a one way. Leadership isn't just me telling someone else what to do. And so that kind of image of the military leader as, yelling at other people and those people saluting and running off to do whatever the leader has said doesn't really fit with my experience, both in the Marine Corps and since then in the civilian business environment. What instead you find out is it's great to bring people into whatever idea you have of what needs to be done or what you maybe are told by your superior officer. They might say, here's what needs to be done. But I would always find out, I would communicate that, but then find out the ways that the folks that I was leading, the ways they thought would be best to implement getting to the mission or the goal that we had. How do they see the best path to get to success? And so soliciting input, engaging folks, and getting them to work together rather than directing someone and telling them you have to do this, you have to do that. finding out the best means and method from the folks to get to the mission that I'm responsible for ultimately, but getting them to take that mission, embrace it themselves, and have them be part of figuring out that solution, whatever solution it is to get to the mission at hand.
So you've I think teed up nicely a direction that I want to go in this conversation around the framework, culture, and types of tools that you had available to you in the Marines are certainly different than what you've experienced in the private sector. And so while you may take the best of the experience that you had in the Marine Corps, you certainly had to adapt some aspects of your leadership style to accommodate essentially the private sector environment, the rules, regulations, how you interact with people, that kind of thing. Was it a shock to you moving from the ranks of an officer in the Marines to private industry? What was that transition like for you in terms of your leadership development and style? Were you the kind that kind of sits back and takes a look at the environment before you start figuring out how you're going to plug in, or did you go charging into it?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, I definitely realize that a lot of being a leader and being able to do the things that you want to do the things you need to do, get the mission accomplished, is to drive things forward and to push people. I found that actually the thing that did surprise me most about going into business after being in the military was that people needed a pretty similar kind of encouragement and buy-in and to the mission in order to accomplish it, but also how the workplace in the private sector is similar to that in the Marine Corps, which is there are a bunch of experts around you that who have great expertise, often more expertise, a great deal more in a lot of cases in their area, their specialty area than I did, both in the Marine Corps and the civilian world. And so really tapping into what are the experiences that people have had in the past that have worked really well and applying those to the situation at hand. Trying to get the most out of people. I think that is, sometimes harder, that part of it, sometimes harder in the civilian world. People are much more comfortable using any life reasons why they can't get something done at a certain time that anyone probably would have felt in the Marines, but didn't want to tell me that they were going to accomplish something because their kid was homesick or because they needed a vacation. They were stressed out. They didn't like the way I said something. In the Marines, you probably wouldn't get any pushback on that and those fronts, but they were probably experiencing the same thing. And so I think probably that was the hardest thing is getting used to. Okay, I'm going to have to really interest people in the mission, and I'm going to have to bring them along and cajole them in a way that it was a little bit heavier in the business world than it might be in a place like the Marine Corps. But even like I was saying in the Marines, we were young leaders at all levels in the Marine Corps, given a lot of latitude in how they accomplished their mission. And so we did it the way that we figured out ways that worked out best for us. And that, and to a certain extent, that might be true in the civilian world. In fact, there may be times in business where I had less latitude with folks than I did in the Marines. But I definitely realized pretty early on that it's going to take convincing people to help me complete the mission I had at hand. And often in the businesses I've worked in, we have sort of a matrix structure where a number of people might have to, I might need to get a bunch of people to accomplish the mission I have in business, but they might report to someone else. And so, trying to get their bosses buy-in for my mission, trying to get their attention and priorities to the mission I have at hand, where they've got other multiple conflicting demands on their time and their resources. Trying to convince them that my my task was the most important one of those, or sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes I'd say, hey, I really want to get this done now, but I see you've got these other priorities. So I would talk to the person, find out where they're coming from, realize that their priorities included other things that were indeed more pressing than whatever my priority was. And I think people appreciate that, and that's more common in, say, business than it would be in the Marine Corps. I think in the Marine Corps, you'd get more of an opportunity where someone would sort of feel obligated to the Marine that you're directing, leading, would feel more obligated to put down whatever else they were working on. And so in the civilian world, coming up with those sort of constraints on resources, that was probably a little bit stronger in the civilian world, but not absent in the Marines. And so I definitely find that part of leadership one of the most challenging in business is getting the people who have other priorities to get them to prioritize what you want to do. But it's also one of the most rewarding things of working in business is when you can convince people to take on a mission, to prioritize that amongst a sea of other priorities they have, and then to actually accomplish something in a timely fashion. I learned all that in my time in the Marine Corps, and I definitely use it on a day-to-day, constant basis in business.
So you actually, let's pull a thread back on that a little bit, because what you just described is, frankly, been my personal experience in the private sector world. Less dictatorial, less formal teams. You have to kind of go and build a team structure based on a coalition of the willing, folks who want to prioritize what it is that you have chosen to engage in. And that to me is challenging and infinitely more difficult than, say, being dropped into a team environment and being designated the leader. And maybe the difference between hierarchy and team building in a different fashion. Do you recognize your first experience with that influenced level of team building? Is that something that was it a stark difference to you? Did it take you a while to get used to that? Or do you feel like you recognized it quickly and were able to, be effective in an environment like that almost immediately?
Yeah, no, it took me a little bit longer, and I'm still always, I certainly am able to fall back on the foundations of leadership training I received in the Marines. But now, it's a lot more, you have to be extra entrepreneurial in an entrepreneurial setting, and in most business settings. I found that, our team is changing at times, either people leaving the organization or bringing in new people. We also have situations where we are hiring consultants for portions of what we're doing, and so finding the right people. Whereas in the military, you'd be given a team, and hey, that's your team, and you can't go pulling Marines out of another platoon to fit into your group. You got the kind of the squad that you've got, and so I think that part of it in finding people that will make up your team, that's certainly a new challenge, and the fact that can change at different times as people come in and out of the workplace, and then accommodating people's different schedules. Those things were a lot more challenging in business. But like I said before, I think what the Marine Corps did was teach me how you can really enjoy leadership. And I'm not saying that that's what all individuals need. It certainly was the way that got me to really appreciate and love leadership. But in business, it's like, you might seek a role of leadership because it brings, greater opportunity, greater pay, a higher title. And I found I've been in a number of entrepreneurial settings, and a lot of it is the leadership is, figuring out the rules of the game as the game is going on and the game is changing. And that's, I find that to be one of the most interesting and challenging opportunities as a leader is being in an environment that's dynamic. But again, I harken back to the Marine Corps training that we got in leadership was to really put you in different environments and try and have you take the basic elements of leadership and organization and use those in whatever situation happens. So I feel comfortable given that training. I feel very comfortable doing it. And yeah, you're right. It's there may be aspects of it that are more challenging in a business setting, but they are still, you're still able to rest on the foundation of, okay, I've got these leadership tools, I got these leadership traits, I got these experiences that I can pull on. And now it's like, how do I bring others into what I'm doing, and in a way that has them buy into it in a way that's sufficient enough to get the things done, and in a way, hopefully, that makes it so that they have really, the folks that I'm leading have taken on those things as they're important to themselves. It isn't just like, hey, I got to do this thing because James says I got to do it, or because he thinks it's important, but getting people to really see the importance to them and how their part is vital to making the whole team effort work. That is both challenging in the private sector, but also incredibly rewarding in a way that I probably wouldn't have guessed coming out of the military.
So one of the vital characteristics, I think, of a successful leader is a sense of self-awareness, sort of understanding how you show up, having the humbleness to be able to look back on experiences and evaluate whether or not you've been successful so you can learn from them. How do you think that's impacted your ability to lead? Do you consider yourself uniquely self-aware, and like how much time do you spend in reflection, thinking about how you perform from a leadership standpoint and trying to change it?
Yeah, well, I do have a healthy dose of humility going through life. I've been seen where you have to be humble in the face of adversity, humble in the face of what different things life throws at you. As it relates to self-awareness, I think my biggest ability to be self-aware came through getting married, and
as it has for many of us.
Yeah, I think like having a kid also helps you that way because you're seeing yourself through another's eyes. But I think having a mirror turned against you when you get married and say, "Oh, you think you're so great? Well, look what I see." Is both humbling, but also was incredibly helpful for me as a person to grow, and so honestly, I'm deeply appreciative of my partner Wendy being there for me and being willing to put up with things, and also it's probably easier in a lot of cases just to ignore someone's shortcomings or and just focus on the good things. But actually, when you learn about yourself through their eyes, it's incredibly helpful for self-awareness. As a leader, you get enough. I have to go back to it, but getting training in the Marine Corps as a leader, you get thrown into during training situations, you get thrown into different leadership roles to see how you handle them. You never have all the information that you'd want to have to make a decision, but we learned early on that making a decision sooner rather than later, based on the information at hand and the input of the folks around you, is more important than making a decision now based on the information available, and input is more valuable than waiting and getting more and more information. And often the situation of waiting to make a decision is a decision in itself, and sometimes it's a decision that you don't want to make. You're basically saying, I'm not going to decide, I'm not going to take action, I'm not going to influence the situation now, and that might be the most important move, is to influence the situation right now. So I learned a lot of that, and so I think that helped me have an awareness of how tenuous those situations can be in life, where you do want to make a decision based on the information at hand and move forward. And I think probably my inclination earlier in life would have been to wait longer to get more information and to let me figure out this thing and really analyze it. And my inclination later on in life now is, and I think this is the self-awareness of I'm okay with making a decision that could be wrong. I'm okay with making a decision that will have to be adjusted in the future based on other information that comes about, but I'd rather take action. And so I think that sort of awareness of myself, my own inclinations, but also the things that work really well, I think that's incredibly helpful. And I think the self-awareness to say, am I going to ask someone to do this thing that I would not do? I think that's really critically important. Is really being aware, or am I asking something that's maybe is reasonable or unreasonable, but that I'd be willing to do, and that do I have a good reason for asking someone to do that, and is the urgency with which I'm giving this task required? So I think those things where you have both self-awareness and self-reflection, I think those are critical. Now, if in a combat situation, it might you might have to make quicker decisions and more forcefully, but most of us are making decisions that don't have any kind of impact on life or limb, and so, but I still find that self awareness of what my tolerance for making decision without full information, and yet the experience of knowing that probably making some decision is better than making no decision, and trying to find that point. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but I do feel like there is enough self-awareness there that has come through life experience that allows me to be a better leader. And I hope that that's how folks that I'm leading feel about it too, that they see what I'm doing as something that I would take on if I wouldn't ask them to do something I wouldn't do, and also that I wouldn't ask them to do something unless I thought it was really important, unless I if I have the time that I can explain them to why I think it's important to them.
So let's stick with this theme of self-awareness, and the lane I want to go down is how you carry both the positive and negative experiences with you from one leadership experience to the next. And talk to me about the room that you give others, maybe your team members, to fail, pick themselves up and learn from their experiences, and how you've been treated for, in terms of folks that have led you. Have you been given the room to, in the tech industry, we have this expression of failing fast so you can get to the usable solution. What's your experience been like that? How do you make sure that you're giving folks room to fail and they can do it in a transparent way but learn from it, and maybe experiences that you've had with others leading you, and whether or not they've given you room to stumble and fall and pick yourself up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's as key is giving folks a chance to realize that failing is okay, and that they can learn from that. I certainly have had that experience many times in my life where I'd hate to fail, but I know that I will, and I want to be able to encourage other people to going back to what I said earlier about making a decision based on the information available rather than waiting too long for maybe other information to come and not taking action. And yeah, we'll do it. I don't want people to truly fail, and I don't want us to do something that's that we can't fix. But for example, I let one of the newer members of my team recently set up a timeline for a project that I knew early on was a flawed timeline. He had made certain assumptions that meant that something that was going to take longer, he thought he could do it in a shorter period of time. But I knew that, he would learn through the experience that he'd set unrealistic expectations for himself. But I liked his initiative. He wanted to get things done, and he wanted to tackle a problem. And so, I go ahead and let him make the mistake. When he realized it a few weeks later, oh man, this thing that I thought was going to take 6 months is really going to take a year. that was fine because he had already made progress towards the goal. He hadn't really lost any time, particularly. He had just made himself, look a little bit bad because he'd set really unrealistic expectations for the completion of a long-term task, and that was fine, And he realized it was fine that he had made a mistake, and he certainly realized that he had made a mistake, and he's learned from it. And now, when we plan out multiple projects that often take years to conclude. Now, when he does it, he's a lot more willing to take in some more, seek inputs from other people, like how long do you think this will really take? How can we push it to do it sooner? What are some realistic timelines? What are maybe some slightly unrealistic timelines, but ones we ought to shoot for? And I think, he went from a more sort of academic understanding of how long something might take to a real world understanding of it, and stumbled in the process, got a little bit of mud on his face, but really learned a lot. And I think he wouldn't have learned as much had I told him, no, you can't, that's the wrong timeline. Here's the right timeline. Now work towards that. Having this experience of having sort of failed in a small way, and he wouldn't have thought about it as failure, and I wouldn't have said it as failure, but having made that mistake, let's say, he was definitely ready the next time to really think it through and make a much better evaluation and decision on the next time that he did it. And so I do think that it's important to allow people a lot of slack to figure out things for themselves. I certainly believe in giving guidance on the way when warranted, and don't want to make anyone look bad or experience some sort of more major failure. But the latitude to be able to make decisions, to learn from poor decisions, is absolutely the best way for someone to actually become a better performer and better leader themselves. So I have experienced that myself, and I truly believe that is an outstanding method for getting people to become a better version of themselves, to become a better contributor and become a better leader.
Have you ever had any experience with the converse of that? In other words, work for someone that maybe created a somewhat constricting environment and didn't allow you the flexibility to feel like you could stumble?
Yeah, and that's a very uncomfortable feeling. I mean, it's certainly constrained my enthusiasm for coming up with new ideas, or my enthusiasm for taking initiative. And actually, I had someone say to me, I was used to taking plenty of initiative, trying things, and maybe them not working out. And I had someone who was temporarily my boss tell me, "You were in the military. You know how to take orders. Why are you taking my orders?" And what I really wanted to say was, "Your orders are flawed." And I think I probably started that way, and then at some point you realize, first of all, tact is a super important leadership trait, and so if tact means I gotta help bring this person along who's my superior, and that's going to work. There's a certain method it's going to work a lot better than me acting like either insubordinate in their eyes, or as some sort of troublemaker, or as a problem in general. And I think that there was a boss I had who did definitely knew someone who came in a kind of immediate situation where we made some changes, and this new person came in through a merger, actually, and I got off on the wrong foot with the person by being a little bit too aggressive in the way I was and taking too much latitude in my own activities, and I benefited in the end by having a great lesson learned. I learned that was pushing back too hard is not going to help anyone, and not exhibiting tact. And also, I was glad when that person left pretty soon afterwards. Left as my boss, but I did learn that even someone who is, clearly my boss, someone who's a senior person, might not have a thick skin and might really just want to see you do what they want you to do. And so, while I didn't think it was that person was exhibiting great leadership skills, it was a situation I was in, and so sort of. As my wife would say, reading the room and really understanding where the other person's coming from is so critical, and I've always believed that. And so I definitely have experienced where I was taking too much latitude and slapped down for that, and learned that it better to be upfront about it. Say, hey, I think I can be effective if I do this, that, and the other thing. And really, if the person doesn't buy into it, either go seek, someone else who might like that or appreciate that, or, follow these orders for a while and try and do my best, but maybe not push it as hard as I think it should be pushed. And sometimes that's what you have to do. But I definitely bristle at the situations where I feel constrained and feel like I could do better and more if I would follow my own counsel. And so that's a character flaw of my own, but definitely I've had that converse situation happen. I learned a lot from it.
So the last area I want to touch on is the concept of how we show up as leaders. You've always impressed me as not only likable. Obviously, I like you. We've had a long-term friendship, but it seems to me that when you show up in a room, that people get an impression of who you are. How you show up as a leader is important, though, because people make assumptions about what it's going to be like to work with you. Maybe even over time, they make judgments about what it's like to work with you or for you. What do you know about how you show up as a leader? What assumptions do people make about you, and how has that worked in your favor, and maybe how has it worked against you?
Yeah, I do think there's a funny thing sometimes where people actually this might be an odd segue from that, but I do feel like sometimes people look up to other people. Sometimes just because of their physical presence, and I'm a relatively tall guy, and what I've seen with my son is even taller than me, and I've seen him throughout his life. People sort of turning to him, assuming that he would know what to do, or that he would want to take on some sort of mantle of leadership at any particular moment. And
there's been some research on this, right? In terms of
and often the taller presidential candidate wins. I think there's it's fairly high correlation, but
right.
But beyond that sort of that one tiny bit of like meeting people and the assumption of leadership. I think what you said earlier, MK, about humility is so important. So I think, what I try and say up front to people is, if I'm in a situation where I'm either, assumed or have been given some sort of leadership responsibility, is talk about how important a team is to me and how important consensus is to me. And sure, there'll be times when I'll say, in a situation, either a time and a place that's, hey, I really want you to do something quickly, or take a priority of mine it's over a certain priority you've been having, doing something when they thought they didn't have any more work to do that particular day, whatever the situation is. But I tend to, when I come into a situation, say, I may be in this role of being a leader, and I want to be, or I feel comfortable because I've got this experience which I think is valuable for this situation. I do say, I don't know everything. I do say that I really want people to be invested in what we're doing, and so I do come at it with the humility of knowing I don't have all the answers. I don't certainly know oftentimes as much as the people around me do about any particular area of their expertise. While I may not know that, I'm enthusiastically taking responsibility to make something happen, and I want to get their buy-in. So I think that's my approach in any kind of leadership position, is any situation, is to acknowledge sort of limitations that I have, as well as strengths that I might have, but really dwell on what is it that we can do as a partnership or as a team that will get things done in a way that we'll all feel proud about and rewarded by in various ways. So I think that's the key thing I approach in any leadership situation is to come in with an explanation of my leadership position, background of why I bring a good amount of experience and judgment to a situation, but a humility to say I can't do it without them, and don't want to do it without them. And so what is it that we can accomplish together through their knowledge, their input, their expertise that makes something better? So that's how I approach just about any leadership situation.
Excellent. The humble leader.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Leadership Student Podcast with MK Palmore, part of the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then add this show to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to the ITSP Magazine YouTube channel, and share the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to connect your brand to our conversations and our audience, visit itspmagazine.com to learn how to sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.